class today. We'll be talking about work-related vocabulary and about jobs. It will be a fairly easy class, but hopefully you'll be able to follow us. And we also have an exercise at the end of the class for you to do. I will also provide the answers, but hopefully you'll be able to do it by yourselves. I'll give you just a little bit of time. So I'll share my screen. And we can start. So when we talk about jobs, generally people will ask you what your job is, or how do you ask what someone's job is. The most common question, of course, you can ask, what is your work? What is your job? What do you work as, or where do you work? And you find different types of information. But the most common question is, what do you do? What do you do? Let's not confuse what do you do with how do you do. How do you do is a completely different question, and a question that you will answer with, I'm fine, thank you. When you ask what do, you talk about their job or their profession. So when you are asked a question like this, you will reply with, I work for an American company, or I work for, and then you can name the actual company that you work for if you want to disclose that information. You can also say, I work in IT or in medicine or on graphic design. If you talk about a specific graphic design, maybe I didn't finish that sentence, but you can finish that sentence and say, I work on graphic design of prototype car. So we know that you work on a specific part of that prototype car, or that producing the prototype car. You can also say, I run the sales department in, okay? And you can talk about either the field, the domain, or you can talk about the company where you work, or specifically the business domain that you work in. You can also say, I manage or I supervise the sales team. Of course, the sales department and the sales team is just an example. You can add any type of department or any type of management position that you have. So let's see. This type of, from this slide, we get I run the, or I manage, or I supervise, and how you would form sentences with these verbs. So when we talk about supervise, you have to follow with a noun. I supervise the department, or I supervise the team, or I supervise my colleagues, or I supervise the workload of someone. The same with to manage. I manage my team, I manage the workload, I manage my daily activities, I manage my life, I manage my company. So it is a noun. Of course, the noun will be preceded by an article, either an indefinite or a definite article. I deal with sales, I deal with secretarial work, I deal with marketing. So of course that's a noun. But if I say I deal with marketing in a multinational company, you see that marketing doesn't have an article. So I can also say I deal with sales. Again, it doesn't have an article. I can also say I deal with the sales in a multinational company, and then I specifically understand that you work for sales only. When you say I deal with sales, you kind of make it a little bit more general rather than a very specific sales or the entire department of sales in a specific company. If you are responsible for or in charge of something, then that means that they are under your responsibility. Of course, you would be the manager or the supervisor. I am responsible for, then you have to follow with an ing verb. I am responsible for selling the company's products online. or I am responsible for promoting the company's products online, or I am responsible for making sure that, or ensuring that my team has everything they need in order to work. And I am in charge of my team, I am in charge of my company, I am in charge of the workload. So you see that you have to follow with different forms of different words for different expressions. So what I would want you to do now is to maybe put in comments for our class today, different sentences from your personal experience, where you tell us if you are in any of these positions. Of course, to be responsible for or to be in charge of, it's not necessarily for management positions or for supervisory positions, because you can also be responsible for your own part in a company. Of course, you can be in charge of different responsibilities, of different tasks, not necessarily your tasks, I mean personally, not someone else's tasks. So I would definitely be interested to see what your comments would be and what type of sentences you can form out of starting with these expressions. Now, there are two different situations, let's say, to be in work and to be out of work. To be in work, it means that you are working and you are fully active on a professional level. And to be out of work, it means that you are unemployed. Well, voluntarily or involuntarily, that's besides the point. To be out of work, it means that you are unemployed, okay, or that you don't want to work, but definitely you are unemployed. And if people are in work, then they can, if they are out of work, they then can be hired, or they can get hired by a certain company. The same, if the opposite would be, if you are in work, you can be fired or get fired. That's when the company decides that it will terminate your working contract and that you are leaving the company. But the opposite of that would be when you decide to leave the company and you decide that it's time to terminate your collaboration with this company, and that would mean that you resign. So we have to be hired or to get hired when you get on board with the company and you start collaborating or working for a certain company, and then to be fired or to get fired when the company decides that they're going to terminate your labor contract, and then when you decide to terminate the labor contract with a certain company, is you resign. It's based on your decision. Now, the different types of jobs that we're going to discuss, the full-time, part-time, temporary, and permanent. I think most of you would know what full-time and part-time mean. Full-time means when you have a full schedule of working with a certain company. The normal schedule would be 8 hours per day and 40 hours per week. Of course, it also depends on the type of job that you do, but the standard is 8 hours a day, and that's full-time. And then part-time is when you work less than that. Part-time usually refers to half of the full-time, which would mean 4 hours a day. But it can also mean 6 hours a day as well. In certain circumstances, it can mean 6 hours a day. Or of course, if you take the average per week, then it doesn't matter how many hours a day you work, but you would have the average or the amount of hours per week. So they come together, and we cannot call them really opposites, but they're definitely different. Now, temporary and permanent. Temporary means when you work on a specific period of time only, and then you have a contract for that specific period of time. The permanent position is on the other spectrum, where you don't have an end time to your contract, attached to your contract. And you have an undetermined period of time. Your contract specifies that. And the permanent position will be terminated either by getting fired or by resigning, right? The temporary position has an end date. At the end of the contract, the contract is either renewed or not, but definitely there's an ending to that period of time. And when that date comes, you are no longer an employee of that company or a collaborator of that company. On the other side, on the permanent one, there has to be unilateral or a bilateral decision to terminate the contract, because the contract doesn't have an end date specified in it. Okay, well, these are the types of jobs that you can have. Of course, we also have collaboration jobs, but that would fall under a different spectrum, right? Rather than the working contract or the labor contract, I think the collaboration ones will be more like freelancer. So here is an exercise. Now you have to rewrite these sentences using the prompts in brackets. If we look at the first sentence, we see, I'm Alicia. I work in a public library in the afternoons from 2 until 6. And you have to use both these words in brackets, I and job. Now, if she works in the afternoons from 2 to 6, then that means that she works part-time because she doesn't have a full schedule. So your sentence would then be, I have a part-time job. And if we look at the second one, my husband works in an office from 9 to 5:30 p.m. or to 5:30 p.m. Then that would mean that he works 8 hours a day and he would have a full-time job. Your sentence would then be, he has a full-time job. Now, I will let you work on sentences 3 to 7. And I would also expect your comments on our on Facebook to see which would be the sentences that you create. And later on, in just the 30 seconds, I will show you the results as well. But I would mostly want you to do the exercise by yourselves, so that you decide what the sentence would be, and then I would only confirm your sentences. You can also change the words, especially the verbs in brackets. You can also change them, but you would have to mostly keep an eye on the tenses that are used in the sentences, and then try to use the same ones, because when we do exercises like this, we would have to be consistent with the information. And that was 30 seconds. And I would want you to let us know what sentences you've worked on. And I'm going to show you now the answers. They're very simple sentences, right? Not very complicated. So he has a full-time job. She works full-time. I work part-time. She has a permanent job. He has a temporary job. She has temporary work. Now, I would also want you to tell me, what is the difference between sentences 6 and 7? He has a temporary job and she has temporary work. You have to also consider the fact that job is countable, work is uncountable. So let's see, what do you think what do you think the reason is that we don't have an article in the 7th sentence as opposed to sentence 6? So these are very just a few words of vocabulary on working and employment. Okay, but we will do some let's say more advanced vocabulary in the future, and we will talk a little bit more about the different types of jobs that we have and the different types of work that you can do with certain companies as well. Of course, we would assume that we are active or professionally active. And we don't talk about students, although we will also do. There are so many things that we can talk about, especially for students as well, people who are trying to get on the market and get employed and, I don't know, find a job suited to their needs. So thank you. I will also end this now. Thank you for joining me today. It's been very easy, and I hope that I will see your comments on Facebook and you get to work a little bit with just a little bit of vocabulary today. So thank you for joining me, and I'll see you next time.